I was 17 years old when I was told that I was going to have to be on dialysis and later have a transplant. I mean, I felt like my whole life had been just ended at age 17. I didn't think there was a life beyond that dialysis machine.
They had taken him to all of the major hospitals that they could. Mrs. Leto said, you know, if it was our son, we would go to Mayo Clinic. And Ed's mom and dad had not even heard of Mayo Clinic.
Those things were all hard, right? In addition to the difficulties, the challenges of leaving your family behind, going to this unknown place, having to navigate where you're gonna live, how that's gonna work, the expenses. He knew some of that because we'd always been told, you know, most people have things from their childhood, and he had nothing because he had tried to help the family out by selling all his toys, right? Just getting rid of all of his baseball cards because he felt he needed to also make a contribution. So that itself is telling, right? I think having had that experience as a kid, it gave him a different perspective as an adult.
Here we are almost 40 years ago, and we're in front of the 624 Center Street house, the original house. And so there's Ed Pompane, and he's flanked by Mary Davey, Greg Warner, and myself. And then I was a transplant surgeon. And so Ed had this vision of doing something to help patients. My first thought, and I think I said it to him, I said, oh, well, Ed, that's not going to work.
He bought an apartment building where Charter House stands now, and his partner, he agreed to furnish a couple of the units so transplant patients could stay there. Well, that went on, you know, for a while. It wasn't ideal either because one of the transplant patients committed suicide, so he knew that there had to be a different way of them coping with their transplant and just having support and everything.
I remember having lunch with Ed a couple times, and I could tell he was really excited about doing this, but it felt to me he needed someone to push him over the ledge. And as we talked about it, it was like, Ed, you're going to do this. You know you're going to do this. Just say, I'm going to do it, rather than just talk about it. And so he did, and I mean, the energy and enthusiasm and commitment and the leadership he provided in those early days were just astounding. I mean, I think he single-handedly went out and raised the down payment for our first transplant house, talked to hotels and motels about donating furniture for that house. He was just tireless in his efforts to get this thing going.
I can't imagine dealing with a very young family, a growing business, and a growing nonprofit organization while also having to deal with serious health issues.
So I kept thinking, boy, I need to do something. I had no idea what a transplant house should look like. I just felt that there needed to be something.
We didn't have any money, so we just kind of went on a wing and a prayer.
It took a lot of tenacity. I think right at the beginning it was kind of like, is this going to work? Is this going to happen?
Somehow Ed was always optimistic. When we were concerned, somehow he came up with the money, maybe somehow out of his own pocket to keep things going. But as I mentioned, this idea of helping patients in a very practical way was attractive.
I do think that when you go through the transplant process, it changes you as a person as well because you have been given this second chance of life. Grandma, his mother Helen, gave him life twice. And I think Dad, you know, when there is so much uncertainty, you embrace and you're extremely grateful for the gift of transplantation because it allows you to not be tied to a machine 3 days a week. It gives you the energy and the flexibility to have a life. Yes, there are side effects of the anti-rejection medications that we know long-term can cause negative effects, but I do think that when you go through the transplant process, receive a transplant and it goes well, that it changes you as a person as well because you have been given this second chance of life.
The one thing about my father is that not only did he not worry too much about life. And you know, I had asked him, you know, some things before he had passed, and he said, Aaron, I just did it. I put it in God's hands and I just did it. I didn't worry about the what ifs, you know, is this gonna work? Is this not gonna work? And, you know, early on, like, you know, when they bought the West Center Street home, it was $100,000. I mean, so at the time in the 80s, I think that was pretty expensive. And he didn't have the connections that he had, you know, 15, 20 years on. But he met a lot of people through the transplant process that he connected with, that he knew he could rely on. It just evolved from there. And I think it is a testament to the people that my dad met and the people that saw what he had envisioned and could say, yeah, let's get on board with this.
I think he was just amazed, you know, that things worked out for him, you know, for the transplant house, you know, and we would drive down 2nd Street, and we would drive down, and when they named the house, he said, can you imagine, could you ever have imagined, you know, that 2 houses, you know, when it started 8 bedrooms, or they were staying at our house or at his mom's house, you know. And then, you know, he always had health issues too, but, you know, he just kind of always, he just got through them, you know, whatever he had to do, you know. So he'd also always say, you know, because of his bad health, and that brought him to Mayo, Rochester from Michigan, everything good happened.
Going through school, I didn't expect to go into transplantation, but it just happened to fall into place that way, and it was the best, like one of the best decisions of my life, because I tell people my job is not a job to me, it's a passion, and I love working with the transplant population because they are special individuals. They go through a lot. And like Ed was saying, transplantation doesn't just stop at the surgery. They have a whole life now of having to take these medications twice a day, 12 hours apart, that helps prevent rejection, but we know that they cause other comorbidities. And it's very challenging because we see it. It's a whole life, it's a whole transition. And I thank my patients and I praise them for doing the best job that they can. In July of 2019, we came together, which we're really grateful for, to get this family photo from, with the banner celebrating Gift of Life's 35th anniversary. So this is actually really special because Dad ended up passing away probably a week after we took this photo. So this is the Pompane family in 2019. It has since grown and will continue to grow. So, but yeah, I cherish this photo.
You know, every year on the anniversary of my father's death, we get together and have a McDonald's cone because that's what my mom and him would like to do. Once a week, my dad would substitute his glass of milk or whatever it is for a McDonald's cone because his doctor said that, you know, there's similar sugar amounts and stuff like that. So they would go do that, you know, and my mom would always tell people the story about how sometimes they'd just go in their pajamas and say, let's go, and hop in the car. So every year on his anniversary, we'll go get a McDonald's cone and sit on the lawn of Gift of Life and have ice cream and talk about our father and his legacy.
Well, it sure brightens your day. If you're having a down day or something, you come over here and you talk to the patients and you see what some of them are actually going through. And it makes me feel wonderful. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. If you had told me that you'd be having a 48-bedroom facility 20 years ago, I would have said no, or 30 years ago, I would have said no way. I can't imagine having done this. I mean, it's just incredible how God's work really did the work. I have to say, it was a soldier.
It's important, you know, only one of my kids, my oldest Henry, was able to meet my dad, but all my kids know about it. You know, it's always gonna be important that be like Papa, you know, give like Papa.